Newcastle beating Liverpool 2-1 in the League Cup final. A massive moment for Newcastle United, who haven't won a major domestic trophy since 1955. Winston Churchill was still alive. The Beatles hadn't cracked America. Elvis Presley didn't have a #1 hit until a year later. That's how long it's been. It's unbelievable. It really is. Massive credit to Eddie Howe, to Isaac, to Dan Burn. We're going to break down what went wrong for Liverpool today as well. Let's just start off with the first half. Newcastle approached this game in a far better way than they did a couple of years ago against Manchester United with Erik ten Hag, where they looked a little bit like a rabbit in headlights. Obviously, the occasion, massive, rightly so, for Newcastle fans. But you felt that the Newcastle side a couple of years ago got caught up in the adrenaline, in the adventure of the moment for Newcastle United, get into a cup final for the first time. And now, the second time in recent history for Newcastle to get to a cup final, and approached it in the right way. Aggressive. They lived with the adrenaline in the right way, but they didn't overexert themselves. They controlled the game at big points, particularly in the midfield. I thought Bruno was exceptional today. Tonali, exceptional. And I think they sort of lived the occasion, but they were a little bit down in terms of adrenaline. They were calm. They were collected. And at points, they bullied Liverpool. That happened in the first half. The physicality of Dan Burn in the box. The physicality of Murphy on the right-hand side, whipping things in. Liverpool couldn't match the physical intensity that Newcastle provided today in the air, on the break, as I've just said, from Murphy, from Barnes on the left, from Isak down the middle. This Liverpool side look a little bit shot. They look low on confidence. They look low on energy. They look low on creativity when they're on the ball. That midfield that we've lauded for the last 6 months of Gravenberch, McAllister, didn't look like they could get their foot on the ball. They looked second best in midfield today. To Tonali, to Bruno Guimaraes, in my honest opinion. Even Joelinton was absolutely fantastic, athletic, powerful. He could have scored as well. Obviously, the winning goal, the kind of the goal that takes Newcastle into such a strong position throughout most of the game, comes from Dan Burn. All game, the ball had been flown into Dan Burn on the edge of the box. These long kind of looping corners, and he wins everything against McAllister. I'm not sure why McAllister was on Dan Burn. I know that zonal marking is used by Arne Slot with the big lads. If you're talking Kanate, if you're talking Kwanzaa, if you're talking Van Dijk, and Dan Burn was always going to be isolated with someone a little bit different to those centre backs that I've just mentioned. But really, McAllister must be the shortest player on the pitch. Can you not change that system for Dan Burn? Really? And then you actually look at the goal. It's like, it's not even about McAllister's height, because sometimes a short player can get in the way and be difficult. He's clearly just not cut out to defend corners. He has to do better on an individual level. He has to take personal responsibility, because he just completely lets Dan Burn go. It's terrible amateur Sunday league defending from McAllister, letting a guy of that power, of that kind of record in the air, have a free header at Wembley. It's crazy how bad it is. It's a beautiful header, powerful, and it caps off a week, which is incredible for a 32-year-old guy who had points in his career where he wasn't even sure he'd be a professional footballer, worked at different kind of regular jobs, and he's climbed the football pyramid, played at Yeovil Town, and now he's part of a side, a fundamental part of a side that's achieved Newcastle silverware for his boyhood club for the first time in close to 70 years. It's an incredible story, and you got to say fair play to Dan Burn. Liverpool had to be better in this game. Look, you're going to concede a goal. I think Newcastle were always going to go into this game with an element of trying to make up for what happened against Manchester United a couple of years ago. They have a point to prove. The fans were incredible in London and obviously at Wembley itself. But Liverpool had to do a little bit better. They're the holders of the League Cup. They've got a lot of players that are fit, that are available, that are trying to bounce back from a PSG loss. You feel in the last couple of weeks, sides have been taking and pickpocketing Liverpool a little bit, realising if you lock up Salah, that Gravenberch and McAllister aren't going to be able to drive incisive balls in between the lines. Diaz's form's dipped. They look a way different side without Gakpo. I know he's had injuries. It's not his fault, but they lack an element of control. I like Dominic Szoboszlai. I don't love Dominic Szoboszlai. I think his quality on the ball can be a little bit off here and there, a little bit hit and miss. I think he's athletic, but you can't have just pure runners in that midfield. McAllister and Gravenberch, I'm not just going to do a U-turn and say they've been terrible this season, because they haven't. And they've built a foundation, a powerful winning midfield that's got Liverpool 13, 15 points clear in the Premier League title race. But in the context of this game, a cup final at Wembley, they were nowhere near good enough, didn't control the game, and allowed Newcastle too many moments to break. And it happened against PSG. PSG found a way through the Liverpool press. Liverpool weren't able to press like they were against PSG. I actually think, I'm going to go back to my reaction to the PSG win for Liverpool. The first 20 minutes set the tone for Liverpool against PSG. They were man-marking PSG against the PSG back four. Each of the Liverpool front four were man-marking them, pressing 4-2-4 at points. I think that set the tone for even this cup final. I really do, because it burnt them out. They couldn't do it in the second half. They got picked off, got to penalties, didn't have the energy to win in normal time. I'm not slagging off Liverpool, but I think the way Arne Slot approached even the first 20, 30 minutes of PSG, not being calm and collected, not guiding his side to be more of a possession-based side like they were at the start of the season, leaning into the Jurgen Klopp kind of philosophy. Not saying they did it necessarily against Newcastle, because that press just simply wasn't there. You've got to realise that this Liverpool side have been playing on adrenaline, battering sides all season, going on multiple fronts. They're bound to be a little bit short, and at points, I think they could have conserved energy with a 1-0 lead against PSG. I think they could have done a little bit more on the ball just to keep it ticking over, put pressure on Newcastle, silence the fans, and stop the adrenaline of the moment. And they allowed Newcastle to flourish. And that's just what I'd say. I'd say Arne Slot hasn't got it right in the last couple of weeks. And Eddie Howe, I mean, a guy that, we have to talk about Eddie Howe as being the best pound-for-pound manager in the Premier League, right out there with Nuno, with what he's doing with Forest. I mean, Eddie Howe is an English manager. Achieving something like that is very, very rare. I mean, give me an English manager that's achieved anything like that in the last 20 years. There aren't many. Harry Redknapp, comes to mind. Roy Hodgson with Fulham, West Brom. I mean, very, very limited in terms of pure English managers. Just like simply in English football, actually achieving things with a big club like Newcastle, very, very rare. Kevin Keegan couldn't do anything with Newcastle United. A couple of cup finals with Alan Shearer down the middle. You talk about Alan Shearer, he couldn't get Newcastle over the line. You're talking, Rafa Benitez has been there. You're talking Sir Bobby Robson, couldn't lift anything with Newcastle United. How sad that was. That was his boyhood club as well, obviously. So for Eddie Howe to achieve what he's achieved at Newcastle United, and let's be real, it isn't the squad that the guys that have taken over Newcastle United would have expected, would have wanted. PSR have limited and curtailed what Newcastle United want to do as a club for obvious reasons. PSR has come in. Eddie Howe has brought in Bruno. He's been exceptional. Big money. Isaac, big money. A couple of others, Tonali, big money. But the rest, you're talking still Dan Burn, Kieran Trippier, Shaw, Murphy. Nick Pope was fantastic today. He's still got a nucleus that you could argue would be, comparable to his side at Bournemouth in terms of quality and how he produced that Bournemouth side out of nothing as well. So Eddie Howe has to get a massive round of applause. It's one of the great achievements in English football in the last 20 years in terms of a managerial achievement, because despite what we say about England being the best Premier League and the best sides, the biggest clubs, there aren't many actual winners who are managers from England. And I think that's interesting. Certainly, if Tuchel struggles at the World Cup, we have to be looking at Eddie Howe now as the cream of the crop of English managers. But you have to let me know what you think in the comments down below about that. Obviously, I have to talk about Mohamed Salah. Look, I don't like... He's obviously going through Ramadan. He's fasting. It's obviously a very important religious part of his life, and many footballers as well. So I don't want any criticism about his performance to be related to that, because if there is a dip in because of his diet and stuff like that, then you got to say, fair play, because a lot of footballers maybe struggle at aspects in this point of the year because it's difficult. Of course it is. You're asking someone to perform against PSG and Newcastle, but ultimately he did start the game. He is fully fit, and he has been flat in the last few weeks. He hasn't had that burst of pace. He never ever troubled Livramento, never troubled Mendes. And if we talk about his energy, or if we just talk about his decision-making, I just think his decision-making was poor today, Mohamed Salah. He just wasn't linking up play. The front three looked a little bit slow, not very energetic. They've lost 10%. They just lost a little bit of sharpness. And I think it's a bit of a struggle. I think it's a struggle playing Diaz and Jota. I don't think you can do it. I think maybe Nunez could have come on a little bit earlier. I get why you wouldn't trust him. But Jota and Diaz didn't work today. Both had poor games. So did Salah. It's not just a Salah slander fest. He's been probably the best player in the Premier League this season. No question. But then if you're saying he's one of the greats of all time, if there are people saying that he's better than Steven Gerrard in a Liverpool shirt, better than Henry, better than Aguero, better than De Bruyne, then you have to hold him up to the same standards as these players that you categorise him as. I've heard people say he's got a better Premier League legacy than Cristiano Ronaldo. So you have to say, did Ronaldo shirk final after final like Mohamed Salah has done, or big games against PSG as well? Do you know what I mean? And if we're saying that we're actually at the point of his career where he can't influence finals, then maybe FSG are right in what they're thinking in terms of a long-term deal. But these are big hypothetical questions. You can't turn on Salah. You can't do a 180 on Salah after the numbers he's providing. If he scores 9 more goals in the Premier League, he's going to be the highest scorer in the history of the Premier League in a single season. So he's still out of this world. But you are allowed to sit there and say, should we be expecting a little bit more from Mohamed Salah? I think so. But I'm going to wrap up with VAR. If you're a regular on the channel, you know how much I despise VAR. The decision for the Chiesa goal, beautiful finish from Chiesa, making the game very dramatic at the end. VAR intervening, trying to take it back to different decisions before that. The Chiesa goal was clearly onside. They knew that they'd made a mistake even going to VAR. Not sure why the linesman got that wrong, because he's got that wrong. So VAR is allowing him to get things wrong. He shouldn't have put the flag up. There's nowhere near offside. He was a good foot in front of the guy. Great finish. Can't take it away from him. But VAR, 3 minutes in a cup final, 80,000 people destroying the actual fabric of what football is all about. It's an absolute disgrace, VAR. It's an experiment on English football that's lasted 6 years now, 7 years. And I think it's been an unmitigated failure. And it isn't improving. It isn't improving the sport. If you back VAR at this point, I think you're an utter disgrace. It's a huge win for Newcastle United. I actually, on some level, can't believe they've won anything. It's that kind of record. It's like England winning something. Seriously, I wouldn't have been able to believe it if England won the Euros. It's like watching Spurs a little bit. But even, Spurs aren't even Newcastle that in terms of trophies. Spurs are, they won something in 2008. I mean, Newcastle United are the Spurs of the North. And they've won something. So you've got to say fair play. They're now no longer the Spurs of the North. Spurs are Spurs. Newcastle are League Cup winners. If you made it this far, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you very, very soon.